Imagine waking up every morning to the historical trauma of the ecosystem services your family or your community has benefited from decades were destroyed. Farmlands where generations have worked on no longer produce good food because of crude oil spill. There is abundance of water, but largely undrinkable because of spills of crude oil. This is not a distant nightmare. This is a lived-in reality for more than 31 million residents of the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. My name is Salome Chinonso Ebuleka, and today I will be talking about an environmental justice case study on the environmental and human health impact of crude oil spill in Niger Delta region of Nigeria. During the course of this discussion, I will talk about three critical aspects, which include we will identify what an environmental justice is, what qualifies as an environmental justice issue. Two, we will look at the human health impact or outcome of this crude oil spill in the Niger Delta region. And lastly, we will look at the broader environmental issues as a result of the crude oil spill, ranging from contamination of soil, groundwater, and etc. So let's begin. Nigeria, as a country, is ranked as a top 10 country when it comes to oil production in the world, and it is ranked one of the highest as oil producing country in Africa. So it is quite rich. And for the oil production in Nigeria is largely concentrated in the southern part of the country, fondly known as the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. They are particularly the region that produces crude oil. The Niger Delta region is made up of 9 states. However, 5 states from these 9 Niger Delta states are the major oil producing states. Since the first discovery of oil in Olobiri, Bayelsa State in 1956, the Niger Delta region has consistently produced up to 1.8 million barrels of crude oil every day. That's surprising, right? And so, since 1956, when oil was discovered in Olobiri, Bayelsa State, the region has served as the mainstay of Nigeria economy. But here is the environmental justice problem. The communities living on top of the oil wells are often the ones not benefiting from it. Instead, they are the ones living with consequences of oil spillage, including polluted water, degraded soil, damaged farmland, declining fisheries, health risks, and loss of livelihood. Now, what is environmental justice and why does this qualify as an environmental justice issue? At its core, environmental justice means that everyone, regardless of income, ethnicity, or where they live, deserves equal protection from environmental harm. It also means that people most affected by environmental decisions should have a real voice in those decisions. And this is why the Niger Delta region is such a clear environmental issue, as oil-rich communities sitting on top of Nigeria oil wells are the ones receiving little or no benefit from revenue generated by oil extraction. In the Niger Delta, many communities have been left polluted and their farmlands have degraded over time because the farmlands are not able to produce good food again. The groundwaters are also contaminated over time. So the consequences of this crude oil spills are multifaceted, and biodiversity is undermined, livelihoods are destroyed, and the health and well-being of affected populations are compromised. According to a study by Mohammed et al. 2024, oil contamination can destroy soil system at a fundamental level, shifting microbial communities that support fertility and recovery, reducing land productivity, and slowing ecological restoration. Akin Pelumi and colleague, along with Okoye and colleague, document persistent petroleum-related contaminants such as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, indicating ongoing exposure pathway throughout the food chain. And in coastal ecosystem, Onyena and Sam also show that oil-related damages to mangroves can unfold over long timeline with habitat loss that may persist for years, reinforcing intergenerational nature of the crisis. A study conducted by Iza and colleagues in Bayelsa State found an elevated lead contamination in two fish species, which are mostly eaten by members of the community. And the lead was found to be accumulated in the muscles of these species, which makes it unhealthy for consumption. So ultimately, the cumulative social, environmental, and human costs borne by the people of the Niger Delta far outweigh the economic gains derived from crude oil extraction. That imbalance in which one group absorbs the harm so that others can profit, the definition of environmental injustice. Now that we know the definition of environmental injustice, let's look at the 31 million residents that are living in this area and how this environmental justice problem impacts them. Who is at risk? As I mentioned, the 31 million residents are at risk, and these communities face a wide spectrum of health risks from chronic and acute exposure of crude oil contamination. According to Gbadamosi and colleagues, more than 75% of Niger Delta residents are subsistence farmers and fishermen whose livelihood are directly tied to land, water, and those are the very resources being destroyed. Gbadamosi and colleagues also found that between 70 and 80% of small-scale farmers and fishers in the region are women, meaning they face the sharpest livelihood losses. When contamination destroys crops and fisheries, it is primarily women who lose their income and their ability to feed their families. Now let's look at some of the respiratory diseases. Respiratory disease over time has been associated with crude oil, especially from gas flaring, which is an associated practice by the oil company. As someone born and raised in River State and have lived most of her life in Port Harcourt, I've had first-hand experience of what it means to choke on bad air as a result of black soup, partly driven by gas flaring, a practice in which excess gas from oil production is burned off, releasing volatile organic compounds and particulate matter directly into the community airspace. These are not abstract pollutants. They trigger persistent conditions including asthma, bronchitis, and other pulmonary diseases in the very community that live in the shadow of the industry. Beyond respiratory harm, prolonged exposure to black soot and its associated compounds has also been linked to fertility complications in both men and women. How about the risk of cancer? Crude oil and its byproducts contain polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and research has shown that these hydrocarbons are strongly linked to exposure to cancer risk. Research has linked exposure to this compound to increased risk of cancer in residents, especially skin and lung cancer. Hazardous substances such as cadmium, chromium, ethylbenzene, toluene are harmful heavy metals. And the difficult thing about this is they accumulate in the body over time, causing problems for humans. What of reproductive and infant health? The impact on reproductive health is alarming. Thompson and colleagues have documented that oil spills significantly increase the risk of miscarriage and stillbirth, pregnancy termination, and neonatal mortality in affected communities. One landmark study conducted by Brulia and Hudler found that nearby oil spill increases neonatal mortality by approximately 38.3 deaths per 1,000 live births, a staggering toll linked to fetal exposure to hydrocarbons that interfere with development. A cross-sectional study conducted in Akwa Ibom State by Nriago and colleagues among 600 participants found that 96% of residents reported headache, 83% reported sneezing, coughing, or nasal congestion, and 80% reported chest pain, and 74% reported diarrhea. These symptoms are consistent with chronic environmental hydrocarbon exposure and reflect a pattern of pervasive illness that places enormous strain on an already fragile healthcare system. ecosystem. Food security. The impact of crude oil spill virtually affects all areas of life, even how residents feed. A study conducted by Odinoha and Brisebi has found that oil spill have led to a documented 60% reduction in household food security. The nutritional content of locally grown cassava has reduced by 40% over time. How about leafy vegetable content, which has also dropped by 40%, while ascorbic acid in leafy green has dropped by 36%. Oshago and Olaifa also found that crude oil spill endanger fish hatcheries and contaminates the fish that communities depend on, striking at both the food supply and the fishing economy simultaneously. Beyond the physical, Gbadamosi and colleagues also note that a significant percentage of communities or residents in these communities suffer from mental health issues such as depression. Of course, this is not surprising. When your farmland is destroyed, your fishing grounds are contaminated, your children are sick, and your government and the multinational oil companies operating in your community provide no adequate compensation, healthcare, clean water, or educational infrastructure, the psychological toll is immense. Now that we know what is environmental justice and why this qualifies as an environmental justice issue, we've also examined some of the worst case scenarios, some of the issues as a result of crude oil spill. Now let us ask the most important question in this podcast: can this problem be solved? Can the damage be fixed? Perhaps this is one of the most sobering questions. The evidence suggests that some environmental recovery is possible but often incomplete. Remediation techniques such as bioremediation can reduce contamination level, but the persistence of hydrocarbons in the environment means that full restoration may take decades or may never occur at all in the most heavily polluted area. Yes, this is the reality of everything. The remediation might never occur, and the farmlands, the water are gone forever. In conclusion, the Niger Delta represents one of the clearest examples of environmental injustice on earth. Soil is degraded, water is contaminated with carcinogens, air is thick with pollutants, fish are laden with toxic metal, neonatal mortality has spiked, cancer rate has risen, and regulatory systems have repeatedly failed to protect its people. What is the fate of the common man? What is the fate of those their communities has been destroyed? All their source of livelihood has been taken away from them as a result of crude oil spill and as a result of an activity they do not even benefit from. What is needed is urgent multi-sectoral action, including genuine environmental remediation, corporate accountability, healthcare investment, and meaningful community inclusion in decisions that shape their environment. The Niger Delta is not a cautionary tale about what might happen. It is a cautionary tale about what has already happened. When the benefit of resource extraction flow upward, while the cost fall on those least able to resist them.